She walked in to surprise her Mafia boss husband with their baby S ultrasound, only to find him tangled in silk sheets with another woman. Most women would scream, but Ajasia just pressed a hand to her pregnant belly and walked away in dead silence. She didn't just leave a marriage. She declared war on the man who controlled half of Milan's underworld. If you think you know how a mobster reacts to losing his pregnant wife, you read dead wrong. Picture this as the late night hours roll in. We find Alicia standing outside her bedroom, the door cracked just enough to let golden light spill into the hall. Her hands rest gently on her pregnant belly, trembling with pure joy. She came home early to deliver the ultimate surprise, his favorite wine and an ultrasound tucked in her bag. But then the world stops. A sharp, unfamiliar giggle echoes from inside, weaving through the deep voice of her husband, the same man who built a 3-year fairy tale out of pure lies. You and I have seen this tragedy before, haven't we? She pushes that door open, and in a single heartbeat, her universe shatters. Tangled limbs and flickering candlelight expose a betrayal so deep, it instantly breaks the woman she was. The pure audacity hangs heavy in the midnight air. A stranger is draped over Milan's most feared Mafia don, flashing a sickening smirk. Then Riccardo locks eyes with his wife. The cruel irony is deafening. He has the words "family above all" tattooed right on his neck, a mark that now mocks Alessia to her core. Most souls would shatter right there, screaming or falling to their knees. But Alessia? She goes absolutely stone cold. She locks her gaze onto this terrifying underworld king, a man whose violent hands have dismantled entire empires. Gripping her baby bump, she absorbs the agonizing truth, and something inside her simply switches off. No tears, no rage. She turns her back on the most dangerous man in Italy, walking away with pure ice water in her veins. Let us pull focus back to the suffocating tension of that hallway. Every single click of her heels against the imported marble strikes like a heavy gavel in a silent room. With each step, she leaves the ghost of her naive, hopeful self behind in the shadows. Back in that ruined bedroom, the untouchable Mafia boss is completely losing his grip on reality. He is cursing, frantically untangling his frame from the silk sheets and roaring her name with a raw, unfamiliar panic. But she never even glances back. She is staring down 23 steps of cold Italian stone. She used to count those very steps on the nights she felt like a cherished queen in a beautiful fairy tale. Tonight, that sweeping staircase is her grand departure from a toxic nightmare. The sweet illusion is finally dead, and she is done playing the fool. Those sweeping stairs are her only lifeline. Suddenly, Riccardo's voice tears through the quiet mansion, demanding her to stop. The heavy thud of his footsteps means he is closing the distance fast. Imagine this terrifying man, a ruthless don who makes street enforcers tremble, desperately scrambling to button his shirt while chasing his pregnant wife. She keeps moving, her eyes locked on the front door. Her keys rest exactly where she left them when she still believed his promises. Then his rough hand clamps down on her wrist. But pay close attention to this moment. She stops, not because his strength forces her. She stops simply because she allows him to reach her. In that agonizing pause, after 3 long years of blind obedience, Alessia finally takes back her absolute power. Time stretches as she slowly turns to face him in the dim foyer. Riccardo towers above her at 6'3", a massive force of nature now visibly unraveling. His jaw is clenched, and those famously dead eyes, the same stare that makes rival bosses sweat, are wide with desperate terror. He begs for a chance to explain, grasping at pathetic excuses. Alessia merely lowers her gaze to his hand on her wrist. She stares at his knuckle tattoos, the very ink she used to kiss in the dark, symbols of his supposed loyalty. It all feels disgustingly cheap now. Without raising her voice, she tells him there is nothing left to explain. Her tone is so flat, so deeply empty, it echoes like a ghost in the grand hall. In that freezing silence, the untouchable Underworld king realizes his entire life is turning to ash. I want you to feel the heavy silence in that room with us. She strips away his power with a quiet truth. She saw everything. He scrambles, stuttering that the stranger meant absolutely nothing. But Alessia cuts through his panic like a blade, asking if that changes anything at all. The silence is suffocating. With agonizing calm, she peels his fingers off her wrist. No tears. He braces for a screaming match, but she only whispers for him to stay back. Desperate, he growls that she is his wife. Her response is devastating. She tells him he just proved exactly how worthless that title is. When he begs, reminding her she is 6 months pregnant, she simply looks into his eyes and says, "Watch me." The heavy front door clicks shut behind her. No explosive drama, just the biting chill of the Milan night rushing in. Milan is a city stained by centuries of brutal betrayals, yet tonight feels uniquely tragic. Alessia walks with grim purpose to the black Mercedes he bought for their anniversary. The bitter irony is not lost on her. Sliding into the leather seat, she realizes her hands are completely steady. That sweet, hopeful girl who parked this car 90 minutes ago, clutching a delicate ultrasound photo. She died in that hallway. The woman, gripping the steering wheel now, is reborn from the ashes of her own broken heart. And here is a truth we all need to remember. When your entire world collapses, you do not have to fall down with it. She presses the gas pedal hard, melting into the blur of glowing neon lights and ancient cobblestones, leaving the suffocating lies of her Mafia marriage far behind in the darkness. She finally arrives at a discreet luxury hotel hidden in the city center, a sanctuary where massive wealth buys absolute silence. Stepping up to the marble counter, she makes her first definitive strike. She leaves the feared Mafia surname behind, checking in under her maiden name, Alessia Bellini. In one breath, she sheds her label as the prized property of the syndicate. Alone, in the sprawling suite, she stands before the massive windows, looking down at the glowing streets while cradling her stomach. It is a baby girl. That was the precious secret she had been so desperate to share just hours ago. Pressing her face against the cold glass, the emotional dam finally breaks. A suffocating wave of grief crashes over her, a mind-numbing betrayal meant to drag her into the abyss. Yet, even as the tears fall, she refuses to let it pull her under. Instead of letting the sorrow consume her, Alessia begins to weaponize her pain. She stands in the dim light, examining her trauma like a detective walking through a cold crime scene. 3 entire years of a hollow marriage, 2 agonizing years of praying for a child, enduring months of relentless illness. She sacrificed everything, only to find him tangled up with a stranger. The darkest realization twists the deeper. That woman looked entirely too comfortable in her marital bed. There was no shock when the door opened. This was not a momentary lapse. This was his established, twisted lifestyle. He had played her for a naive fool, hiding his nature behind her blinding devotion. Suddenly, the silence of the room is violently shattered. Her phone begins buzzing relentlessly against the nightstand. The untouchable Underworld boss is completely unraveling. Ricardo's name flashes across the screen, glowing in the dark like a sedative hazard warning. She sits on the bed, watching the notifications pile up into a mountain of frantic demands. Finally, she presses the power button, plunging the room back into silence. The fallout can wait, but you and I both know sleep is completely out of the question tonight. She lies awake, staring at the ceiling, tearing apart the last 3 years with the cold precision of an investigator. Those endless late nights at syndicate meetings? Convenient lies. Whispering into his phone down the hall? The warning signs were everywhere. He would elevate her like a queen, only to discard her later. She used to blame the stress of the criminal underworld for his cruelty. She had aggressive hells. His twisted affection was real love. Lying in the dark, she finally accepts the bitter delusion of it all. Excusing his cruelty as love was a desperate lie to protect her heart. Suddenly, a sharp kick against her ribs brings her back to reality. Alessia presses a hand to her stomach, and fresh tears spill over. But she is not crying over a cheating mobster. Her heart is shattering for the little girl growing inside her. The agonizing truth sets in. This innocent child will be born into the ruins of a family, fathered by a lying ghost. In the pitch-black room, she whispers a tearful apology to her baby. Yet, as the tears fall, a deeply dangerous resolve takes root in her chest. An unbreakable vow is forged in the shadows. She will never allow her daughter to believe that enduring betrayal is simply the cost of love. She absolutely refuses to let her child learn that a woman's value disappears the moment she becomes an inconvenience to a powerful man. As a child, Alessia watched her mother play the tragic role of the silent, suffering wife. She witnessed the slow fade of a woman who accepted constant disrespect. Years ago, she swore to break that suffocating generational curse. So, whatever violent mafia war Ricardo plans to wage to drag her back, she is fully prepared. The era of biting her tongue is over. Fast forward to daybreak. The Milan sky hangs heavy with bruised clouds. Alessia steps out of the shower, dresses quietly, and locks eyes with her reflection in the vanity mirror. Outwardly, she looks identical to the breathtaking girl who captivated the Underworld boss in a crowded gallery 3 years ago. The dark hair, the same sharp features. But the soul behind her eyes has fundamentally shifted. The fragile girl who foolishly believed her pure love could fix a monster is permanently gone. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? You can see the exact moment the light in Alessia's eyes hardens into cold steel. Ricardo used to obsess over her gentleness, calling her his pure escape from the criminal underworld. But that softness is dead now. Being sweet only painted a target on her back. Sitting alone, she forces down breakfast, eating purely to nourish her unborn daughter. Then she powers on her phone, 47 missed calls, 32 frantic texts. She trashes his pathetic gaslighting messages instantly, but she presses play on the voicemails. The first one is pure chaos. The great, untouchable mafia boss is sob-beasing, begging her to answer. It is peak karma. The lesson here is timeless. Those who destroy your peace will always panic the moment you finally take back your power. Picture this scene in the dark. The terrifying crime boss is leaving messages like a broken teenager. In the first recording, his voice is shaking. He begs her to call, swearing he can explain the betrayal. By the second message, he tries to put the mask back on. He claims his enforcers are only searching for her to protect the baby, even daring to say she shouldn't punish their child. But that third voicemail strips him bare. He is sitting on the floor of her empty closet, breathing in the fading scent of her perfume, sobbing that he will spend his entire life fixing what he broke. The lesson here echoes through every empty room. You rarely understand the weight of what you have until your own hands crush it. All the dirty money in the world cannot buy back a single ounce of shattered trust. Alessia listens to the agonizing sound of his tears, but her own eyes remain completely dry. She plays the recordings exactly twice, taps delete, and dials a ruthless divorce lawyer. This attorney comes highly recommended by an old friend who survived her own toxic relationship. He sits across from Alessia, barely blinking when she drops the heavy, dangerous name of Riccardo Moretti. The lawyer simply nods and addresses her as Mrs. Moretti, but Alessia stops him cold. Her voice is steady as she tells him it is Miss Bellini from now on. She is shedding the weight of his legacy right there in the office. The lesson is simple but vital. Never let a broken marriage dictate who you are. Reclaiming your own name is the very first step in taking back your life from the people who tried to bury you. The attorney leans forward, trying to warn her about the storm ahead. He reminds her that divorcing a ruthless mob boss means navigating a minefield of dangerous enemies and hidden assets. But Alessia's gaze does not waver for a second. She looks him in the eye and explains that she spent the night studying the prenuptial agreement. She found the fatal flaw, a strict infidelity clause that hands her all the cards. The lawyer is speechless. She doesn't want the tainted mansions or the blood money. Her only mission is securing full custody of her unborn child. Stick with me, because the lesson here is crucial. Emotional armor is good, but quiet preparation is your sharpest weapon. When someone hands you a tragedy, you study the fine print, and you use their own rules to walk away victorious. Here is where the dynamic shifts entirely. Alessia recites paragraph 47 from memory, the exact clause that strips custody from a cheating partner. She rests a protective hand over her baby bump, making a silent promise to the life inside her. Her daughter will never grow up in a house where betrayal is swept under an expensive rug. She refuses to let her child be raised around a revolving door of mistresses. The lawyer asks if she is truly ready to declare war on the underworld, warning her of the immense cost and the looming danger. She doesn't even blink. She is ready. The life lesson here rings so true. You must never settle for a partner who treats basically like a temporary suggestion. You alone set the standard for what your family deserves, and you defend that line at all costs. With a calm certainty, Alessia tells the lawyer that reconciliation is a ghost. The paperwork is drawn up, and the quiet war officially begins. For the next 3 days, she vanishes into a nondescript hotel room, leaving Riccardo completely in the dark. In a panic, his true controlling nature flares up, and he immediately freezes every joint bank account they share. He thinks he can force her to come home by starving her out. What the Don forgot is the secret inheritance from her grandfather. Money she never touched once during their marriage. She is completely untouchable. The takeaway here is something we should all remember. Always keep a piece of your independence hidden away. Having your own financial freedom is the strongest armor you can wear against a partner trying to control your choices. By the 4th day, the panic turns into a desperate rage. Riccardo hires a massive team of elite attorneys to crush the divorce. Their opening move is an insult to her intelligence. They claim his betrayal with a woman named Valentina was a momentary lapse in judgment, caused by the heavy burden of marital stress. Sitting in her hotel, Alessia actually laughs. What stress could he possibly mean? The burden of a devoted wife and a peaceful home. She knows the truth in her bones. Valentina was a permanent fixture, not a fleeting mistake. It is maddening how quickly the guilty try to paint themselves as the victim. The lesson to carry with you is vital. People who betray you will always draft a script where they are the martyr. Never let anyone gaslight you into carrying the weight of their own ugly sins. When her lawyer asks how long the affair has really been burning, Alessia just smiles. It is a sharp, dangerous look. She promises to uncover every lie, proving that the Mafia boss isn't the only one who can play the game. Exactly 1 week after her world shattered, she walks right back up to the massive doors of the Moretti estate. She isn't there to offer grace. She arrives at high noon, flanked by 2 towering private security guards and her legal counsel. Ricardo is standing in the grand foyer. He is wearing an immaculate charcoal suit, but his eyes are hollow and desperate. The lesson in this moment is legendary. When you have to face the demon that broke your heart, you look it dead in the eye, but you never go alone. Guard your boundaries with everything you have and protect your fragile peace. The air inside that grand foyer is heavy enough to crush bone. Ricardo stands under the chandelier, his dark hair perfect, the dark ink of his gang tattoos crawling up his neck. Those letters spell out family above all. The irony is so thick it feels like poison. He whispers her name, and the great king of the underworld sounds like a frightened child. Alessia doesn't flinch. She delivers her terms with absolute ice, stating she is only there for her personal documents and will be gone in 2 hours. She completely blocks his desperate attempt to explain. The lesson here cuts deep into human nature. Words are cheap, and hypocrisy is always exposed by action. A person can carve their supposed morals right into their skin, but real loyalty is only measured by what they do when the lights are turned off. You and I have probably both felt this kind of bitter clarity. She looks him dead in the eye and warns him that any interference will be heavily documented for the judge. The muscles in Ricardo's jaw jump wildly. You can see the violent, controlling nature of the mob boss fighting to break out. Yet, for the first time in her life, Alessia feels absolutely no desire to soothe his anger. He weakly admits he sent the staff away so they could talk shamelessly, using their unborn baby as a weapon of guilt. Without missing a beat, she reminds him that her pregnancy certainly didn't stop him from dragging another woman into his bed. The vital life lesson here is one of liberation. Stop shielding the feelings of someone who recklessly destroyed yours. Dropping the urge to heal a toxic partner is true power. After tearing apart his hypocritical father routine, she turns her back and begins climbing the sweeping staircase. Panic finally shatters Ricardo's composure, and he shouts that he loves her, and Alessia freezes. She doesn't turn around. She simply tells the empty air that she does not believe him and that their definitions of love are entirely incompatible. Then she continues her climb. Moving through the dark, echoing halls of the mansion, she feels like a ghost haunting her own past. She takes only her grandmother's humble jewelry, leaving his blood-stoked diamonds sitting in the dust. The profound life lesson here is undeniable. Love without respect is just manipulation dressed up. If someone's idea of loving you includes dragging you through the mud, it is time to pack your bags and walk out. She walks right past their expensive wedding album, viewing it as nothing more than an artifact of a beautiful lie. With her documents secure, she steps into the shadows of his private study, slipping the lock with a quiet click. A dark skill learned from years beside a mobster, she hunts for financial records to cement her case. But what she pulls from the bottom drawer stops her dead. It isn't just credit card receipts. It is a hidden lockbox overflowing with photographs. Pictures of Valentina, yes, but also a dozen other women. It is a staggering visual timeline of betrayal stretching back through their entire relationship. The lesson to take away is terrifying but necessary. Buried secrets always claw their way to the surface. If you ignore the quiet warnings, life will eventually force you to look. There she sits, 6 months pregnant, on the cold hardwood floor of a monster's office, surrounded by glossy photos. The evidence proves he was betraying her long before she ever put on a white dress. The nausea is overwhelming. In that quiet, terrible moment, something deep inside Alessia's chest permanently snaps. Her spirit doesn't break, but every last drop of mercy she held for Riccardo Moretti evaporates into the cold air. When the clock strikes 2, she glides down the stairs. Riccardo is pacing the foyer, a pathetic, crumbling shadow of a king. She stops on the bottom step and softly asks if he remembers the little trophy collection hidden in his desk. The life lesson here is absolute. Betrayal burns the bridge of empathy to ash. Never expect grace from the soul you chose to slaughter in the dark. Welcome back to the Midnight Hour. Tonight, you and I are going to unpack a tragedy of broken vows. Alessia did not just confront him, she dismantled him. With a voice as cold as ice, she thanked Riccardo for dating those illicit photographs, making it effortless to trace his betrayals before and after their wedding. The blood completely drained from his face. She looked right through him, asking if she was ever anything more than a respectable ornament for his public image. When he fell to his knees to beg, she raised one hand. She told him to save the empty apologies, promising to burn his empire to the ground in a courtroom using his own twisted souvenirs. The lesson here is simple but heavy. Iron to Nouveau. The truth is your absolute strongest weapon. When someone hands you the evidence of their own destruction, you use it to carve out a new life. She knew exactly where to twist the knife. Alessia promised to weaponize paragraph 47 of his own prenuptial agreement against him. She would take full custody, ripping away the one thing this terrifying Mafia prince truly loved, his daughter. She stepped into his shadow, close enough to see the thick veins throbbing on his neck and the violent tension in his tattooed fists. Leaning in, she whispered that he should have kept his sacred vows. As she walked toward the door, his hand shot out, trembling in the empty air, completely unable to touch her. The man who ruled the underworld begged, his voice cracking in the dark, pleading for his little girl. Remember this. Arrogance will always be your downfall. When you believe you are untouchable, you inevitably lose everything that matters. Riccardo always believed he held the strings to the universe. Yet there he was, a shattered king pleading at the threshold of his own ruin, offering her the world if she would just stay. For one agonizing second, Alessia looked at him and saw the dominant man who swept her off her feet 3 years ago, the phantom of the man who whispered gentle promises on their wedding night. But the illusion was dead. He was a hollow liar. She looked into his desperate eyes and delivered the final blow. She told him he should have considered his family before making his secret romance the center of his universe. Then she slammed the heavy oak door right in his face. It is a quiet tragedy. You simply cannot build a lasting kingdom on the fragile foundation of broken promises. What follows now is an all-out war, and she refuses to lose. The legal battlefield was a bloodbath of dirty tactics. Riccardo unleashed a swarm of high-priced lawyers to suffocate her. They fought to suppress the hidden photographs, quietly intimidated witnesses, and tried to claim the prenuptial agreement only punished long-term affairs, not isolated mistakes. It was pure manipulation, but Alessia stood her ground like a fortress. While her team fought tooth and nail, she built a sanctuary. She secured a quiet downtown apartment, miles away from his suffocating mansion. She poured all her fragile energy into her unborn child, attending every doctor appointment with fierce devotion. She even walked into a therapy office, which was an incredibly bitter pill for her pride to swallow. But here is the truth. Seeking help in your darkest hour is actually a massive flex of human strength. Alessia carried this heavy belief that sitting on a therapy couch meant she was broken. But this room offered nothing but quiet safety. No pitying glances. Just a steady presence while Alessia spilled 3 suffocating years of mobster marriage drama and the cold terror of raising a child alone. By their 3rd hour together, the therapist delivered a gentle reality check. Alessia kept weeping, calling herself blind and foolish for believing his lies. The therapist quietly stopped her. She explained that trusting the person you love is not a tragic flaw. It is a normal human trait. The true victory was packing her bags the exact second the illusion shattered. The takeaway here is profound. You are never foolish for giving your trust, but you discover your true power when you revoke it from those who play games. Stick with me here, because this is where the healing actually begins. Alessia had to slowly digest those words. She confessed how Ricardo always made her feel dangerously special. He convinced her she was the only pure light in his twisted underworld. She desperately wanted to believe their romance was untouched by his violent reality. The therapist looked her in the eye and said that hungering for pure love does not make you weak. The guilt belongs entirely to the man who weaponized that beautiful trust against her. Hearing that validation finally shattered her heavy emotional walls, and she wept. Weeks later, at 7 months pregnant, she decided to step out of the shadows. She secured an invitation to a high-profile gallery opening. Ironically, it was the exact same room where their eyes first met 4 years ago. Stepping into that elegant space was a calculated act of war. She was broadcasting a silent message that she refused to fade away in shame or become a tragic whisper among the city elites. She walked through the doors draped in an emerald green dress that proudly hugged the curve of her pregnancy. She wore minimal makeup and her grandmother's antique pearls. She looked devastatingly calm, and she knew without a doubt that he would be waiting. Sure enough, Ricardo held court across the room, flanked by his dangerous associates. His suit was immaculate, framing the dark tattoos crawling up his neck and hands. Those dark marks used to send a thrill right down her spine. Now, they were just neon warning signs. Let this sink in. Red flags are warnings to protect you, not pretty decorations for a broken heart. Their eyes locked across the crowded floor, and the air grew impossibly heavy. Alessia did not blink. Ricardo remained perfectly still. For a few agonizing heartbeats, the expensive art and the murmuring crowds dissolved into nothing. It was just the two of them in a suffocating standoff. Then, Alessia delivered a crushing blow without lifting a finger. She smiled. It was not a welcoming expression. It was the cold smile of a woman who had already won. She turned her attention to Marco, an influential, older businessman who used to run with her grandfather, and laughed warmly at his story. She could literally feel Ricardo burning holes into her back with his stare. Let him burn, she thought. She spent the rest of the evening floating through the room, a queen reclaiming her own throne, far from his dark shadow. Naturally, the wealthy elite were feasting on the drama. The whispers hummed through the gallery like a swarm of bees. People traded dark rumors about Ricardo and his young mistress, quietly praising Alessia for her ruthless courtroom victories. She let the gossip wash over her, offering nothing but absolute grace. But then, Marco gently placed a wet hand on her lower back, to guide her toward the champagne. It was a completely innocent, fatherly gesture, but to a violently jealous Mafia prince watching from the shadows, it was an unforgivable challenge. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet to freezing. Alessia felt the heavy prickle of danger crawl up her spine before she even turned her head. Ricardo was finally making his move. Always trust that sudden drop in your stomach. Your gut senses danger long before your eyes do. You and I both know that feeling when a storm is about to break. Alessia knew she had maybe 30 seconds before her deeply toxic ex completely shattered his public mask. She smoothly excused herself from Marco with a polite smile and slipped away before Ricardo could close the distance. She expertly wove herself into a tight circle of wealthy women near the exit. Safety in numbers is a real survival tactic when dealing with monsters. Ricardo froze dead in the center of the gallery. Even from 20 feet away, the raw, violent fury rolling off him was suffocating, his jaw locked and his tattooed hands curled into tight fists as he battled his own dark urge to drag her out of there. Alessia simply cast one casual glance over her shoulder, meeting his manic stare. The unsaid words hung heavy in the air. "I do not belong to you anymore." That final, dismissing glance struck him like a physical blow to the chest. His dark eyes swallowed the room, swirling with a terrifying cocktail of absolute fury, agonizing heartbreak, and a deeply toxic obsession. It was enough to freeze the blood of any ordinary person. But Alessia just turned her back and kept walking, though she gracefully exited the party early, leaning on the polite excuse of her pregnancy, but her soul was absolutely soaring. She had stared straight into the hungry jaws of the big bad wolf and never even blinked. She proved to her ex and every whispering elite that she was totally unbreakable. Slipping into the leather seat of her luxury car, she finally let her eyes fall shut, breathing out a long sigh of hard-earned victory. The lesson here is monumental. The purest revenge is simply proving they have absolutely no power over your peace. The quiet comfort of the car was suddenly shattered by a deep voice cutting through the dark. He whispered that it was quite a beautiful performance. Alessia gasped, her heart slamming violently against her ribs. Ricardo was sitting right there, swallowed by the heavy shadows of her own back seat. How did a ruthless crime boss bypass her security? He casually leaned forward, dropping the terrifying truth that her driver now belonged to him. He bragged that every guard in the city was either swimming in his money or paralyzed by his reputation. He was wrapping his cold fingers around her reality, trying to prove she could never outrun him. But Alessia forced her breathing to steady and ordered him out of her car. He snarled back, claiming her entire polished new life was funded by his dirty empire. She just stared at him, entirely unmoved by his desperate shadows. "Let us wrap this up because this is where the mighty fall." She coldly reminded him that her grandfather's massive trust was managed by the exact same firm his crime family depended on. They were untouchable. As that reality hit him, the terrifying Mafia boss mask shattered. You could see the agonizing desperation bleeding out of him. He was literally begging, offering her absolutely anything, just to wake up in the same house as his little girl. The thought of losing his daughter broke him, but Alessia remained a stone wall. She said he sacrificed his bloodline the night he chose betrayal. He pleaded it was just a mistake. She snapped back that his hidden photos proved a deliberate pattern. The harsh truth is unavoidable. Your darkest secrets will always leave a paper trail. Picture the heavy air of midnight, rain bleeding down the window panes. Alessia finally lets it all out. her voice trembling but sharper than broken glass. She throws those damning photographs between them, paper ghosts proving the monster he truly is. When Ricardo desperately plays the biology card, trying to claim his right to their unborn child, she cuts him down instantly. Blood doesn't forge a father, showing up, standing firm, holding the fragile promises you make in the dark. That is what builds a father. He had burned every single bridge. Then the tension snaps. With a predatory blur, he closes the distance between them, a shadow lunging into the desperate light. The lesson here is quiet but heavy. Genetics might start a family, but only unwavering loyalty can keep it alive. Let's step into this frozen moment together. Alicia stands her ground, staring into the hollow eyes of Ricardo, the city's reigning phantom. She asks him, her voice barely a whisper, if he truly wants to add a salt to his suffocating ledger of sins. For a breathless second, the ruthless boss awakens within him, a dark storm funneling straight toward her. But then, the armor shatters, his hands fall away. For the first time, the untouchable Don looks absolutely paralyzed by the terror of losing his bloodline. His voice fractures, confessing he has no idea how to repair this ruin. Alicia remains resolute, reminding him that the bill always comes due. Shattered, he simply commands her out of the car. Life's hardest truth? Even the mighty must eventually pay for the darkness they sow. Imagine the bitter chill of the streetlights hitting the wet pavement. Alicia yanks her wrist free, tearing away from the Don's heavy grasp. She looks this underworld king dead in the eye and builds an iron wall right there on the sidewalk. No messages, no midnight phone calls, only the cold language of attorneys. She strips him of his power, telling him to stop haunting her life from behind the tinted glass of his luxury sedans. And Ricardo, the most lethal man breathing in this city, just swallows it. He steps backward into the biting wind, a hollow shell of a man. As his car disappears into the black of night, the silence left behind is deafening. Nobody is finding peace tonight. It reminds us of a bitter reality. Drawing a firm line in the sand is agonizing, but protecting your own soul requires you to stop holding back. You and I have to look closely at what truly broke her in that moment. It wasn't his rage, but the sheer, agonizing desperation. Riccardo Moretti, a titan who buried problems under brutal force and endless wealth, actually let his voice break. For 3 long years, she believed he was a god in his own grim universe, capable of bending reality to his design. Now, he stands before her, utterly helpless. The tragic part? A quiet, aching corner of her soul wanted to wrap her arms around this ticking time bomb and soothe his panic. But she grounds herself. A gentle kick against her hand reminds her of the fragile life growing inside her. It brings us to an agonizing truth. You cannot heal a deeply broken soul, no matter the depth of your love. You have to secure your own survival first. This is the exact beat where Alicia reclaims her power. She isn't walking away out of spite or some hollow need for revenge. She is fighting for the unborn daughter resting near her heart, ensuring she never learns to trade her dignity for a toxic shadow. She refuses to be sacrificed on the altar of a broken romance. Now, heavily pregnant, she pushes through a brutal divorce that feels like a battlefield. Legal strikes fly like artillery in the dark. She hides away in a fortress, surrounded by guards, completely untouched by her husband's poison. The lesson here resonates deeply in the quiet of the night. True power is not found in throwing a punch. Real strength is severing a generational curse, ensuring the ones you love can finally breathe without tasting fear. The shadow army protecting her is bleeding her inheritance dry, but breathing clean air is worth every coin. Yet, there is always a ghost in the machinery. Through the grinding gears of legal discovery, her attorneys unearth the darkest, rotting roots of Ricardo's empire. These were the whispers she had chosen to deafen herself to: smuggling networks, extortion, and the chilling disappearance of a rival syndicate head just days before her wedding. Her lawyer meets her gaze and delivers a crushing blow. The man she slept beside was a living nightmare, and in the bruised corners of her heart she already knew. It brings us to a heavy realization. Closing your eyes to a warning sign never erases it. It merely ensures you will stumble in the dark when the truth finally shatters the illusion. You and I have probably both looked the other way because reality was just too sharp to swallow. Alessia is now haunted by night terrors, suffocating in dreams of blood and the lifeless stare Ricardo wore when erasing his enemies. The agonizing question breaches the surface. Did the hands that cradled her face in the dark also steal breath from others? The tragic answer is yes. She twisted her own mind into knots, forcing herself to love a phantom built on cruelty. But the naive girl who stood at the altar is dead. In her place is a woman burdened with devastating clarity. Then a ghost reaches out. On a quiet afternoon, a sealed envelope arrives at her lawyer's desk, a letter penned in the careful script of the Underworld king himself. The lesson is simple. Truth, no matter how much we avoid it, demands to be seen. Ricardo's letter is a haunting echo from the abyss. He begins not with an apology, but with a cold admission that his sorries are nothing but ash. He confesses that 1,000 letters could never wash away the sins she has seen. Then comes the agonizing truth. He married her simply because she made his hollow chest feel human. Imagine a man raised in a desolate underworld, taught that every soul is just a bargaining chip, and every smile is a hidden blade. To him, love was nothing more than an invitation to an early grave. It leaves us with a deeply unsettling lesson to reflect on tonight. A poisoned environment fundamentally rewrites your soul. Even the men pulling the strings of the city are often just broken, terrified children hiding behind a facade of absolute power. The ink on the page reveals the fragile core of a monster. He writes that when she looked at him, she didn't see the shadow of the syndicate. She saw the man beneath. She found the single ember of decency he had buried beneath a lifetime of ruthless ambition. He openly bleeds his confession onto the paper. He still loves her for that grace. But love alone cannot silence a demon. The tragic flaw in his design was thinking he could lock his violent underworld in a box while living in the warmth of their home. He fought to break his own cycle, and he lost, morphing into the nightmare she fled. It brings us to a harsh but necessary lesson. You can never build walls high enough to separate your darkness from your light. The shadows you hide will always eventually bleed through and consume the things you love most. He closes the letter not with a desperate plea, but with a crushing surrender. He wants her to understand one final truth. His betrayal was never a reflection of her worth. It was entirely the result of his own fractured soul, his inability to be the shield she deserved. He writes the hardest words a proud man can bear, admitting she and their unborn child deserve a life untouched by his chaos. Alessia reads the heavy words 3 times, her face a mask of stone. She seals it in a drawer and walks into the daylight as if her chest isn't quietly caving in. But fate has its own cruel timing. 3 weeks early, the sudden rush of water in her quiet living room shatters the silence. The lesson is undeniable. No matter how meticulously we plan our escape, life will always arrive unannounced and force our hand. Stick with me. This is where the world narrows down to blinding lights and agonizing survival. The hospital room is a blur of shouting nurses and crashing waves of pain. Her mother and closest friend form a desperate shield around her bed during the longest 12 hours of her life. Yet, in those brief, hollow moments between the agony, her mind betrays her, slipping back to Ricardo. She isn't thinking of the ruthless Don, but the missing father, the man who should be gripping her hand, but who traded his family for the crown of the underworld. Beneath the hardened shell of her rage, a profound and heavy grief quietly breaks her. It forces us to acknowledge a devastating reality. The sinister choices made in the dark will eventually strip you of the brightest, most sacred moments of your life. As rain lashes the hospital window, she grieves the phantom life she thought she was building. But at 3:47 in the morning, the quiet cry of baby Juliana cuts through the sorrow. 6 pounds, 8 ounces, crowned with dark hair, and bearing the undeniable, sharp features of the man she left behind. The moment Alacia pulls that fragile life to her chest, the orbit of her entire universe realigns. She whispers softly to her brave little girl. When Juliana blinks up with those hauntingly familiar eyes, Alacia feels her heart break and heal in the exact same heartbeat. Suddenly, the divorce, the hitman, the lingering dread, it all fades into meaningless background noise. The lesson is profoundly simple tonight. Sometimes, the arrival of a pure, unwritten chapter is the only thing that teaches you what truly matters. Staring at her newborn's face, she weaves an unbreakable oath. I will be your shield, and I will be enough. Tears fall so fiercely she doesn't realize she is weeping until her mother gently wipes her cheek. Outside this warm room, the city's underbelly is already moving. Within hours, Ricardo knows. He is a ghost who owns the shadows. He has ears in every corridor, banned or not. There was no reality. Wafidi missed the dawn of his bloodline. The next morning, he doesn't arrive as a tyrant. He stands like a phantom in the sterile hallway. Dressed in a flawless dark suit, his eyes are hollow, betraying days of sleepless torment. It reminds us of a bitter truth. Power can buy you the world, but it can never buy back the precious moments you burned down. You and I have probably both felt that chill in the room when a ghost walks in. His dark, sprawling ink stands out sharply against his pale, exhausted neck. He looks like a man who barely survived a car crash. The grandmother spots him first. Her shoulders lock tight, voice trembling, as she asks if she should call the guards. But Alacia does not flinch. She looks right through the hospital glass and catches his eye. The moment he sees the tiny bundle in her arms, his massive, imposing frame sags, leaning toward a child he has not even met. Against every instinct, she tells her mother to open the door. Just 5 minutes, she says. He gets one single look. Her mother hates it, but steps aside anyway. Look, offering grace to the person who broke you takes monumental courage. That mercy is never about saving them. It is always about setting yourself free. Let us step inside that hospital room together. Ricardo crosses the threshold like a man walking on broken glass. Every movement is agonizingly slow, terrified that one sudden twitch might shatter the fragile peace. When he speaks, his voice is gravel and rust, barely managing a whispered thank you. But Alacia gives him nothing but winter. She cuts him off, making it absolutely clear that this is not a pardon. He takes 3 heavy steps toward the bed, and the damage is undeniable. Dark circles hollow out his eyes. The same hands that casually dismantled empires are trembling violently as he quietly begs to hold his little girl. Never forget this simple truth. Real power is never found in money or street reputations. True power is finally holding the one thing you are absolutely terrified to lose. Every survival instinct in her blood is screaming to pull the child back. The man over her is a walking hurricane, yet she knows the bitter truth. A child deserves her father, despite the sins he carries. With heavy reluctance, she passes baby Juliana into his arms. The contrast is unbelievable. This hardened architect of violence cradles the infant like she is woven from thin air. His eyes, famous for their merciless calm, flood with immediate warmth. He breathes her name, whispering that it belonged to his grandmother. Alicia quietly replies that she remembers. The kingpin is anchored, unable to tear his gaze away from his newborn daughter. Listen closely to this. Sometimes, the absolute most fragile things in this world are exactly what it takes to break the hardest of men. He murmurs that the baby is perfect. Alessia, sharp and defensive, shoots back that the girl has his nose and eyes, praying heaven helps her. She does not know if it is a joke or just pure exhaustion. The silence is suffocating, broken only by the steady hum of the heart monitors, a portrait of a ruined family. Then Ricardo drops the match. His voice is terrifyingly flat as he promises to sign everything, the divorce papers, full custody. He volunteers for strictly supervised visits. He tells her he will build whatever walls are necessary to protect them from the monster he has become. Shocked, Alicia simply asks him why. He slowly raises his heavy eyes, and the tragic truth finally hits her. Sometimes, real love means building a cage for yourself just so your family can fly. Look into those dark eyes, and you will find nothing but a wasteland. The undisputed king of the city has been completely reduced to ashes by a 6-pound infant and a woman who refuses to break. His deep voice splinters as he confesses that she was right all along. He traded his real world for an empty throne. The agony in his throat is raw as he admits his own daughter will grow up knowing her father is a monster and that she will be entirely right. Gently, with a quiet reverence, he presses a lingering kiss against the newborn's forehead. Handing the fragile baby back to her mother, he swears the war is over. There will be no messy courtroom battles. The hardest lessons in this life always seem to arrive at the exact moment it is too late to change the ending. Stick with me, because this is where the facade crumbles. He begs for crumbs, is pleading just to see his child occasionally, even if Alessia has to watch him like a prison guard. Right there, the illusion shatters. Riccardo Moretti, the ghost who haunts the streets of Milan, buries his face in his hands, choking back sobs like a wounded animal. Witnessing the collapse of this dangerous giant, a tiny crack forms in Alessia's armor. It is nowhere near forgiveness. What he destroyed cannot be rebuilt, but she murmurs that she will consider it. He gives one stiff, heavy nod before walking out into the sterile hallway without looking back, and just like that, Alessia plunges into the overwhelming trenches of new motherhood. The endless, blurry nights, the relentless crying, pure, exhausting survival. For the first few weeks, the grandmother stays close, while loyal friends form a fortress around the house. They bring warm meals, taking shifts to rock the baby so Alessia can steal 5 precious minutes under a hot shower just to feel human again. In the background, the legal machine moves with terrifying speed. True to his word, Ricardo offers zero resistance. He signs his rights away. Full custody is surrendered. He wires a staggering mountain of wealth and enough quiet money to guarantee the child never struggles a day in her life. His only reward is 2 brief, supervised visits a month, held firmly on Alessia's home turf. On a cold, grey Tuesday in October, the ink finally dries. The violent storm of their marriage officially dies, leaving nothing but an aching, echoing silence in its wake. Staring down at the finalized documents, there is no sweet taste of victory. No grand exhale of relief. Alacia just feels completely gutted. But time is a relentless river, and it pulls her forward. Juliana reaches 1 month, then 2, then 3. Against all the odds, the baby is a quiet blessing. She sleeps through the night, offering easy smiles that serve as a lifeline for a mother healing from betrayal. But fate always has a cruel sense of humor. The infant is becoming a perfect mirror image of the man who broke her heart. Those same piercing, calculating eyes, the sharp, stubborn chin. She even scowls with the exact dark intensity Ricardo uses to freeze his enemies. Alicia forces herself to look past the ghosts in her daughter's face, locking her bitterness away as the tightly guarded visitation days finally arrive. When the visits happen, Ricardo operates with military precision. He knocks exactly on the hour and leaves the very second his time is up. He does not try to manipulate the boundaries. He never throws a charming glance at his ex-wife. He is entirely consumed by his role as a father, and frankly, it is a massive psychological trip. The most lethal predator in the underworld is changing diapers with the delicate care of a saint. He sits perfectly still for hours, serving as a mattress for a sleeping infant. The quiet room shifts as his deep, resonant baritone fills the house with old, melancholic Italian lullabies. Alacia stands in the shadows of the hallway, watching a stone-cold killer melt into utter softness. The sheer contradiction of his dual nature threatens to completely break her weary mind right in two. She cannot reconcile the image. The tender, exhausted father on her couch bears zero resemblance to the venomous snake who burned their life to the ground. This man does not wear the mask of a criminal kingpin or a smug cheater. It is like allowing a polite ghost into her home. It makes you wonder, does it not? We think we know the people we sleep next to, but human beings are terrifyingly layered. The fragile rhythm of their new normal holds steady for months. Then, on an utterly unremarkable evening, the quiet is violently shattered. Alicia is finally unwinding, a rare glass of red wine in hand, soaking in the silence. Out of nowhere, the front gate buzzer screams. She checks the glowing security monitor. A pale, visibly trembling young messenger is standing on her porch, clutching a thick, sealed envelope in his sweating hands. The anxious runner stammers her name, whispering that the package holds urgent intelligence about Ricardo. A cold spike of adrenaline hits her veins. Keeping the door chain fastened, she snatches the envelope through a narrow crack. The moment the kid sprints away, she tears it open. Inside is a glossy photograph. It is Valentina, the very same ghost who poisoned her marriage. The horrific part. Ricardo is behind her in a clinical hallway. His unmistakable tattooed hand is resting gently on the woman's arm. The digital timestamp mocks her, taken just 3 days ago. Her vision blurs with white-hot rage. She immediately calls her lawyer, voice shaking with fury, ready for a bloodbath. But the lawyer tells her to breathe. Men with that much underworld power attract dangerous enemies who treat psychological torture like an art form. The attorney lays out the brutal reality. A kingpin like Moretti has countless rivals who would happily detonate his personal life just to watch him bleed. The photograph could be a smoking gun or a clever forgery, engineered to spark a syndicate war. They need concrete evidence before rushing a judge. If it is real, they will rip away his final shreds of fatherhood forever. You and I know a betrayed woman should feel energized by revenge. But Alessia is utterly drained. The emotional whiplash is breaking her spirit. Rather than throwing gasoline on the fire, she chooses to become a quiet hunter in her own home. When the next visitation rolls around, She studies his every breath. She searches for the rigid jaw, the averted gaze, the subtle tells she spent a decade memorizing. She is hunting for the monster hiding perfectly behind the gentle father. The air feels heavy tonight. Ricardo looks exactly as he always did, yet entirely different. He is utterly consumed by the baby, radiating a tender devotion he never offered Alessia during their shattered marriage. Her mind whispers the cruel truth. He used to look at her like that, right before the betrayal. She lets that pain sit for an agonizing week. Finally, when the child is safely tucked away, she corners him in the quiet hallway. She demands they talk. He freezes, caught completely off guard by her sudden voice. Without a flinch, she shoves the damning photograph directly into his hands. A violent storm of shock and terror washes over his once hardened features. You and I know this simple truth. The ghosts of our past betrayals always return when we are most vulnerable. Confusion flashes in his eyes before he truly sees the picture. Instantly, the chilling shadow of the ruthless mob boss returns, darkening his face and reminding Alessia just how dangerous this man truly is. He demands to know who sent it, his voice a dangerous rumble. She coldly replies that it arrived with no name. He asks if she actually believes it, and she throws the accusation right back at his heart. An agonizing silence stretches between them. Finally, he breaks. He admits the photo is real, but the context is a twisted lie. He drags a trembling hand through his hair. Valentina is dying of severe cancer. With absolutely no money, she begged him to fund her final chance at life. The lesson here is simple. Sometimes the deepest truths are hidden far beneath the surface of our very worst assumptions. Alessia stands there, stunned. She asks if he seriously expects her to swallow that story. He stares into her soul and tells her not to believe a single word. Instead, he urges her to call the hospital and check the medical bills herself. He confesses that he destroyed her trust and deserves zero sympathy. But then she asks the heaviest question. Why spend a fortune to save the woman who helped burn their marriage to the ground? His response is chillingly quiet. She is dying, he says, and no matter the sins they committed together, nobody deserves to face death in agonizing pain alone. He looks away, admitting he is genuinely trying to become a better man in the shadows. The simple life lesson is this: real, lasting change only truly happens when nobody is watching to give you the applause. So Alessia is staring right into his soul, looking for even a single hint of a lie, and guess what? She totally cannot find it. She tells him straight up that she is going to absolutely fact-check him, and if he is playing games, he loses his kid forever. Absolute boss move right there. Ricardo just steps back, completely cool, and tells her to go ahead and check the facts. And you know what? The hospital confirms everything. Valentina Rossi is actually battling stage 3 cancer, and some entirely anonymous donor is footing the massive bill. Stick with me here, guys. The simple life lesson is to trust, but verify, because sometimes the truth is way wilder than the lies we tell ourselves. A ruthless mob boss funding the survival of his former mistress is a profound puzzle. Alessia is losing her mind trying to decode it. Is Ricardo still playing in the shadows? Or is the master of the underworld actually trying to plant one seed of goodness in a lifetime of violence? During the next visit, she stops hunting for his usual deception. Instead, she observes this deeply broken paradox of a man. The terrifying Don Moretti cradles his infant daughter as if she were made of fragile glass. He hums to her in a soft, gentle baritone that his street soldiers could never imagine. Here is a simple life lesson for us to ponder. The human soul is incredibly complicated, and Sometimes the most hardened monsters protect a fragile softness we never thought possible. When little Juliana begins to cry, this ruthless kingpin paces the floor, rocking her gently until her breathing settles. There is no performance here. His love for his daughter is entirely pure. Watching him, Alessia is struck by a heavy realization. Can a man be a terrible husband, yet remain a deeply devoted father? The question haunts her. Soon, the baby's first Christmas arrives, bringing a quiet, peaceful night. Just her mother, a few friends, and a happy infant watching the glowing lights. Ricardo is completely locked out of this memory, banned from holidays because Alessia chose to shield her child from his chaos. Remember this simple life lesson. You are allowed to build firm boundaries to protect your peace, even when it leaves someone you once loved out in the freezing cold. A quiet package arrives at her door. No return address, just her name in the sharp handwriting she would recognize anywhere. Inside rests a rare first edition of her favorite Italian poetry collection. She had whispered about this exact book years ago. Tucked between the pages is a note from Ricardo. He confesses that he remembers every dream she ever shared, but he tragically forgot how to show that they mattered. Alessia stands, frozen, fingers trembling against the worn leather binding. She is certain she no longer loves him, yet her heart aches at the memory of what they were. We must learn this simple life lesson. True attention to someone's soul is a powerful thing, and the quiet words you spoke years ago can carry the absolute heaviest weight today. It is not hatred she feels anymore. It is that agonizing middle ground where your heart forgets how to beat. As the new year settles, a strange peace forms. Alessia no longer watches his every move during visits. Slowly, Ricardo starts slipping heavy confessions into the air. He is tearing down his dark empire, pulling away from the brutal violence, and surrendering his crown. He is building a clean life, desperate to ensure his little girl never grows up suffocated by his shame. When Alessia asks why he is offering her his deepest secrets, he looks down and admits he just wants her to stop looking at him like a monster. Here is a quiet life lesson for tonight. True growth is a punishingly slow journey, and rebuilding broken trust always requires painful, unwavering effort. He whispers that he is not ready to surrender his hope, but the fragile peace shatters in a heartbeat. Alessia is holding her baby when the phone rings. A freezing voice addresses her as Mrs. Moretti. The stranger delivers a terrifying message, claiming they hold her child's life in their cold hands. Demanding she pass a greeting to Ricardo from Victor Anton. They threaten the innocent baby for the sins of the father before the line goes dead. Alessia is paralyzed by dread. She does not dial the police. She dials Ricardo because when the dark underworld comes hunting, you need a monster to hold the door. The life lesson here is stark. When you are drowning in deep waters, you must call upon the one person equipped to fight the current, regardless of your painful past. He answers on the first ring. Panic choking her throat, she breathes the name Victor Anton. The line plunges into a terrifying silence. When Ricardo speaks, his voice is devoid of humanity, the cold sound of a man ready to murder. He commands her to lock the doors. 12 minutes later, the violent scream of tires tears through the street. Ricardo does not arrive alone. He brings the crushing weight of his empire. Dark vehicles block the road as armed enforcers flood the shadows. Ricardo bursts through her door, moving like a dark hurricane, ready to drown the world in blood to protect his child. Let us remember this simple life lesson. True devotion is measured in the brutal moments of crisis, showing up instantly when the shadows fall, with absolutely no questions asked. His eyes lock onto Alessia and the child, scanning them with desperate urgency. Once he is certain of their safety, the father vanishes, replaced by the cold dawn. He demands every syllable of the call. As she whispers the threat, Ricardo's face hardens into unyielding stone. He reveals the grim reality. Victor Anton is a ruthless rival from a Russian syndicate who just crossed the ultimate line by targeting a child. Ricardo steps close, his voice dropping to a heavy command. They must leave tonight and vanish into his secure fortress, far away from the bleeding streets. We cannot ignore this vital life lesson. The violent sins of our past always cast long shadows, and old debts will inevitably return to haunt the innocent people we love if we fail to bury them properly. Alessia rejects the command instantly. She reminds him she signed those divorce papers specifically to shield their child from this nightmare. Ricardo physically flinches, a proud king shattered by the truth. He quietly admits his failure, confessing he underestimated his enemies. He pleads with her to let him take control of their survival. It pulls a bitter laugh from her throat, since control was always his poison. But then she looks deeper, beneath the shell of the boss. She sees the raw terror of a father begging for his little girl's life, knowing Alessia despises him. The crucial life lesson here is clear. Pride is a deadly poison in a crisis. When the lives of those you love are on the line, you must be willing to swallow your ego and ask for help. Welcome back, late night listeners. Tonight you and I are walking down a very dark road. Picture Ricardo, a man who usually breaks knees, now practically on his own, begging to protect his family. Just as the silence suffocates them, baby Juliana lets out a sharp, shattered cry. Alessia pulls the trembling child close, her heart hammering against her ribs, and makes a split-second choice. 24 hours, that is all he gets. Ricardo exhales a breath that carries years of regret, sweeping them away to a shadow-draped villa tucked high in the hills of Milan. It is a modern fortress of steel and stone, complete with a nursery untouched by the underworld. A little late-night wisdom for you. Always have a sanctuary in mind, because you never know when your world will entirely collapse. Once inside the walls, he leaves them alone in the quiet. Alessia paces the hardwood floors, tracing the cold glow of the security monitors. On the screen, Ricardo transforms back into the ruthless general of his syndicate, directing soldiers without eating, without resting, a machine locked on a violent frequency. At 3 a.m, the house is dead silent. She wanders down and finds him in the dim kitchen light. His suit jacket is abandoned, sleeves rolled high to reveal the ink of a brutal life. His eyes fixed on a glass of amber whiskey he refuses to drink. His first words are a gravelly whisper, asking only if their daughter is safe. Alessia freezes, breathless. True dedication, my friends, is exactly what happens in these lonely hours when nobody else is watching. She steps into the room and asks about his next move. His voice is a low rumble as he explains his men are hunting the Russian boss. He catches himself before describing the blood he plans to spill, knowing she despises that world. But the adrenaline of the night still courses through Alessia. In a moment of pure exhaustion, she pulls out a chair and sits right beside him. Ricardo stares at her, completely paralyzed. He cannot fathom that she chose to be this close. She mutters a quick warning not to overthink it, and he nods slowly, swallowing his pride. They sit together in the thick velvet of the night, and strangely, the heavy silence offers a shield. Here is a difficult truth. Sometimes the person who broke your world is the only one who understands the storm you are surviving. The ice cracks when he asks why she trusted him instead of calling the authorities. Alessia does not sugarcoat a single word. She tells him straight to his face that the police are nothing but paper shields against a monster like Anton. She looks at the man who shattered her vows and admits that while he was a terrible husband, he is a master of his dark trade. When her child is in danger, he is the only weapon sharp enough to end it. And then comes the crushing blow. She tells him she no longer hates him. Hate requires a fire she simply cannot maintain anymore. She is only left with exhaustion and a cold, hollow disappointment. It cuts him deeper than any blade ever could. Apathy is the final quiet stage of grief. When they lose the energy to fight you, the connection is already dead. He swallows the bitter whiskey, the burn matching the truth he finally decides to speak. His voice drops into the shadows as he swears his love was real. She was never just a convenient piece of a mob boss cover story. She was the one lingering light that made him want to be good. Alessia looks at him with tired eyes and asks the one question that matters. Then, why did you not choose to be better? The kitchen falls completely still. He whispers that being a good man is simply too hard, and beneath all his power, he is nothing but a coward. Alessia stares at the most feared man in the city and sees only a fractured, broken soul. Forgiveness is miles away, but the frost between them begins to thaw. Admitting your own toxic flaws is agonizing, but it is the only true bridge toward redemption. 3 entirely quiet days later, the major threat is totally wiped out, gone. Alessia does not even ask how Ricardo and his brutal crew handled Victor Anton, because honestly, ignorance is pure bliss when you are dealing with the actual mob. By the morning of the 4th day, Ricardo rolls into her place, looking like he has not slept in a century. He just drops the massive news that they are completely safe now. Now, they have to figure out their very next move, and the tension is insanely thick. She is looking at her ex-husband, this terrifying mix of monster and guardian angel. Look, the absolute lesson here is that sometimes the very people who break your heart are the only ones who can protect it. Alessia lays it all completely out, saying she wants their totally innocent daughter to have a real actual father, not just some supervised weekend visitor. Ricardo looks completely shocked by this. She admits that any guy who goes 3 straight days without sleep just to keep his kid perfectly safe deserves way more than 2 miserable hours a month. She straight up confesses that she was so busy trying to make him pay for his incredibly dark past that she was completely ruining their bright future. She is not handing out complete forgiveness yet, but she sees he is trying. Honestly, the takeaway here is that holding on to pure anger only poisons your own future, so let the heavy grudges entirely go. Ricardo is looking right at her like she just handed him the absolute winning lottery ticket. He asks what she entirely needs, and she demands absolute, bulletproof honesty. No more totally dark secrets, no more hidden dangerous threats, or she takes their kid and vanishes off the totally face of the earth. He completely agrees to give her whatever she absolutely needs. And for the totally first time in forever, she actually entirely believes the guy. They end up absolutely crashing at the safe house for another entire week, mostly because Alessia is just way too totally drained to face the real totally normal world yet. The clear lesson here is that rock bottom can be a completely solid, perfectly new foundation. It is absolutely not some totally cheesy romance movie suddenly, but they actually find a completely real ceasefire in this incredibly massive war of theirs. They are entirely eating together, sharing totally late-night baby duties, and actually talking without expensive lawyers, entirely breathing down their absolute necks. Get this? The incredibly scary Mafia boss is going to actual therapy and reading entirely normal parenting books. Absolute wild total character development. She totally asks why he is acting so completely different, and he drops a totally heavy truth bomb. He completely says it is because he entirely lost her. The life lesson? True change happens when you realize you might lose what truly matters. He absolutely, entirely swears there have been totally zero, entirely other women since she completely walked out that entirely totally front door. He completely tells her Valentina is literally just an entirely absolute charity case and nothing totally perfectly else. Of entirely course, Alessia is perfectly skeptical, but Ricardo absolutely does not throw a totally massive, entirely perfectly defensive fit. He entirely just completely tells her to entirely watch his perfectly entirely actions. Over entirely perfectly time and completely totally decide for entirely perfectly herself. The entirely totally completely absolute life perfectly lesson here is entirely perfectly that actions entirely absolutely speak entirely perfectly louder than perfectly entirely perfectly words. We all know this is not some cheap romance novel where love magically fixes bullet holes and broken trust, but tonight it is a start, and Alessia is learning that a fragile start is sometimes all we get. The next few months blur into this strange, careful dance. They are no longer at war, but they are definitely not at peace. Ricardo keeps every single promise. He arrives exactly when he says he will. He is steady. He is present. He is playing the role of the man she dreamed of when she first said her vows. Listen to me on this one. Do not obsess over securing the perfect, flawless ending. Just focus on showing up today and making an honest, grounded start. The rest will slowly build from there. The strangest part for her is how deeply unsettling his new behavior is. She has the sharpest instincts in the world. If he were playing a game, she would see right through the mask. But watching a ruthless enforcer show pure, raw sincerity, that flips her entire universe upside down. One rainy evening, while he is patiently helping baby Juliana stand up, he catches Alessia watching him from the doorway. She claims she is just observing. He does not flinch. He just looks at her and asks for her honest verdict. Is he finally a changed man, or just the most talented liar breathing? Here is your life lesson. When your trust is shattered, it is completely fine to question every move until the truth is proven. He looks right at her and says he has changed, but he is also an excellent liar. It is a chillingly honest answer. The man ran a criminal empire, so of course he knows how to manipulate, but he swears he is choosing to be bare with her now. He tells her he understands why she analyzes his every breath, searching for the trap. Then he does something shocking. He apologizes, not just for the cheating, but for forcing her to live in this exhausting state of pure paranoia. While he says it, little Juliana takes 2 shaky steps and falls over. The lesson tonight is a heavy one. Owning your past mistakes is a good start, but recognizing the lasting paranoia you caused in someone else is what proves you have grown. The little girl sits on the rug looking completely surprised. Ricardo forgets his dark world entirely. His voice cracks as he whispers that she took her first steps. They both lunge forward to let us tune into the fallout. The divorce papers are inked, the foundation of trust reduced to ash, leaving only their daughter as the single surviving piece of their wreckage. After Ricardo steps out into the night, Alessia sits alone in the dark. A glass of deep red wine rests in her hand as she agonizes over a fleeting moment. A simple brush of his knuckles against hers, and her entire nervous system betrayed her. Her mind screams warnings of fire and ruin, yet her pulse hammers a frantic rhythm. She hates that she still feels the magnetic pull of this walking disaster. She remembers the ghost of his devotion, the cruel illusion of forever. The hardest truth of all, your mind and your heart are rarely playing on the same team when the past comes knocking at your door. Listen closely, because Alessia is fighting a war inside her own head. Her memories are acting like double agents, whispering that perhaps this kingpin has actually found his soul. She wonders if this quiet man is the real Ricardo, and the betrayer was just a nightmare. But she walked into that trap once before, and it led her right to that bedroom door, pregnant and watching her life burn. She finishes her wine and surrenders to sleep. Time drifts forward to Juliana's first birthday. It is a small, carefully guarded celebration. Then the shadow returns. Ricardo asks to attend. After a bitter internal debate, she grants him entry, but forces a rigid 2-hour window. Remember this. Sometimes you must build absolute boundaries just to survive and protect your own fragile peace. Her rules were clear: stay for the cake, then vanish. But the Don arrives early, and he has stripped away his armor. The tailored suits are gone, replaced by worn, dark denim and sleeves rolled up over his faded syndicate ink. For the first time in forever, he looks like a breathing man. Instead of a phantom of the underworld, he brings an absurd, massive cloud of pink and silver balloons, filling his car with fragile color. Alessia tries to pierce the moment, coldly reminding him that a baby will never remember this day. But Ricardo answers with a quiet, devastating sincerity. He says that he will remember, and there will be photographs to prove her father existed. Showing up for the people you love is the true currency of life. The raw honesty catches her entirely off guard. The feared Don looks at her, and you and I can see genuine hope flickering in his dark eyes. Alessia softly admits she wants her daughter to know her father. But Ricardo shifts the weight of the room. His voice drops low as he asks what she actually wants for herself. The air grows incredibly heavy. Alessia shatters a little, confessing she is entirely lost. She wanted a clean break, a life erased of his name. Yet here he stands, rewriting the script of their tragedy. She is drowning, unable to stitch together the monster who destroyed her with the gentle man holding balloons. Ricardo meets her gaze and whispers that they are the very same man. We all carry conflicting versions of ourselves, and accepting that dark duality in the people we love is a heavy cross to bear. He lets the balloon drift upward as he delivers a brutal dose of reality. He does not flinch from his sins. He admits he was the architect of her destruction, the absolute monster who tore her world apart. No shields, no excuses. But he insists he is also the man bleeding to earn redemption. Both shadows exist within the same flesh. Alessia trembles, asking the impossible question. How can she ever trust the good man will outlive the demon? What happens if the darkness swallows him again? His response is a cold blade of honesty. He tells her she cannot know. He admits his vows are currently nothing but dead air. You can never erase the profound damage you leave behind. The only path forward is to own the wreckage, without hiding behind the comfort of empty guarantees. With his promises burned, the only currency Ricardo has left is sheer consistency. He swears to simply remain, to let the steady rhythm of his actions slowly outweigh his past. Alessia warns him with a trembling voice that such forgiveness could take a lifetime. The mob boss stares deep into her wounded soul and quietly replies that time is the one thing he has. Even if her walls never fall, he refuses to walk away. Before the gravity of his words can settle, the front door opens and the world rushes in. The party begins, loud and chaotic. Little Juliana is passed between friends, sweet icing smeared across her cheeks. Oblivious to the war her parents are fighting. Words are cheap currency in the dark. Showing up day after bleeding day is the only way to rebuild a shattered trust. The room buzzes with life, but Ricardo fades into Tucídides, whose shadows strips away the aura of the untouchable boss. The tension is palpable. Alessia's mother offers him nothing but frost, and her friend looks ready to draw blood. Yet, Ricardo swallows every bitter glare without a hint of armor. He understands that absorbing their venom is just part of his penance. As the evening bleeds out, the feared Don silently begins gathering the empty cups and trash. Alessia weakly tells him to leave it, but he refuses, seeing the deep exhaustion anchoring her bones. They drift into a quiet choreography of cleaning, moving in the synchronized rhythm of two ghosts who once shared a heartbeat. True humility means enduring the pain of your consequences without a single complaint. The apartment sits in heavy midnight silence. Little Juliana is asleep, leaving Alessia and Ricardo to finish the slow birthday cleanup. The air between them is electric, thick with old pain. Ricardo lingers by the door, totally frozen. "I should go," he murmurs, refusing to move. "You should," she replies softly. He tries to speak, but she raises a trembling hand. "Whatever you are about to say, do not. I cannot handle any more weight tonight." She braces herself, expecting him to pour out his soul. Instead, this once ruthless boss drops his defenses completely. "I just wanted to say thank you," he whispers, "for letting me be part of her day." Remember this, friends. When you have shattered trust, the only real bridge back is a quiet, deeply humble thank you. Alessia let out a fragile breath, believing she had dodged a bullet. "You are welcome," she whispered, but then the hammer fell. Ricardo looked right into her eyes and added, "And that I love you." Just like that, the boundary shattered. "I am sorry," his voice was thick with heavy regret, "but I cannot watch you be an incredible mother to our daughter and not tell you." She tried to stop him, but he stepped toward the door. "I am not asking for anything. I just need you to know. I have never stopped loving you. I was just too broken to show it properly." He walked out before she could process it. The second that heavy door clicked shut, Alessia collapsed onto the couch, releasing a flood of tears. We eventually learn that sometimes the words we are most afraid to hear are the ones that finally crack our hardened hearts wide open. She sat there frozen, entirely terrified, because she realized she might be falling for the Mafia boss all over again. As the weeks dragged on, Alessia did what any of us do when running from our deepest fears. She buried herself in work, desperate to avoid him. But here is where the story shifts. Ricardo did not push her at all. He only texted her about their daughter, showed up exactly on time, and left on the dot. He gave her absolute space. His quiet respect for her boundaries was driving her crazy, because it proved he was finally putting her needs ahead of his own. It meant the dangerous man she once knew was actively becoming a decent, trustworthy partner. The hardest lesson in life is realizing that people actually can change. And it is utterly terrifying when they finally do, because it leaves us with absolutely no more excuses to hide. She did not want him to be a good man. She wanted to stay furious, because holding on to bitter anger always feels much safer than risking a shattered heart again. But carrying that heavy emotional armor is absolutely exhausting. Then, out of nowhere, on a quiet Wednesday, her phone rang. Ricardo sounded completely hollowed out. I need you to come to the hospital, he pleaded. It is not Juliana. She is fine, but I need you here, please. A cold dread washed over her. What happened? Just come. I will explain when you get here. That 20-minute drive was a blur of pure blinding panic for Alessia. Her mind raced through every violent mafia scenario imaginable. Was it a rival gang? A hit gone wrong? Life constantly proves that the delicate peace we take for granted can vanish in a single phone call, dragging us right back into the chaos we tried to outrun. When she sprinted into the cardiac ward, she found the untouchable mafia boss, sitting alone in a pale hallway. His face was a haunted grey, and his tattooed hands were locked together like he was begging for a miracle. Ricardo. He looked up, and she saw something that shattered her reality. Tears. My father, his voice cracked. He is dying. You have to understand the history here. Domenico Moretti was a terrifying figure who looked at Alessia like a bad investment, furious that his son married for love instead of a mafia alliance. She never understood Ricardo's desperate need for that cold man's approval, but watching her ruthless ex-husband break down changed everything. True grief is a great equalizer. It strips away our powerful titles and heavy armor, leaving us as nothing more than frightened children crying in the dark. It is a harsh truth that the deepest wounds we carry are often the ones our parents leave behind, and those early scars simply never fade away. He had a massive heart attack yesterday, Ricardo explained, his voice entirely hollow. They tried to intervene, but the damage was too extensive. He is refusing treatment. Says he has lived long enough. Alessia stood there stunned. I am sorry. Then he dropped a heavy plot twist. He asked to see you. That stopped her dead in her tracks. Me? Why? I do not know. He specifically requested you. Said there was something he needed to say. Every single alarm bell in her mind screamed at her to run from this cruel old man. Why walk in just to be insulted again? But she looked into Ricardo's tired eyes, swimming in grief and desperation, and her walls finally crumbled. Okay, she whispered softly, I will see him. Step into that room with me. The ultimate mafia godfather, Domenico, lay in an exclusive hospital suite, tethered to humming machines. This man used to command the underworld. But now, he looked like a frail, hollowed-out old man disappearing into the white bedsheets. His body was failing, yet his eyes were still sharp as a blade. He called out for Alessia, his voice like crushed gravel. She told him straight to his face that she only showed up because his grieving son begged her. No sugarcoating, just ice. Surprisingly, Domenico offered a weak smile. He respected that she never faked it. He told her he had maybe a week left. It makes you realize that a person can spend a lifetime hoarding absolute power, but at the end of the journey, we all end up breathing our last in the exact same fragile state. The shadows in the hospital room felt heavy as the dying mafia boss commanded Alessia to listen. Looking her dead in the eye, Domenico confessed he had never approved of her. He thought Ricardo was a fool from Maximilian, with zero underworld connections and nothing to offer but love. He admitted he had brainwashed his son into believing romantic love was a fatal weakness. But then came the stunning plot twist. The old man rasped that he had been dead wrong. Alessia stood perfectly still, not blinking. Domenico took all the heat for Ricardo wrecking their marriage, the affairs, and the endless lies. He owned up to raising his boy to believe family was just a chess game for cold power. It is a deeply tragic truth that our most profound life lessons usually crash down on us when we are completely out of time to fix the damage we have caused. The godfather admitted he had taught Ricardo that wives were nothing more than trophies for the bloodline, not actual partners. He had handed his son a free pass to sever his street life from his marriage, greenlighting the exact behaviors that shattered her heart. You and I both know how devastating that toxic loyalty can be. But then, Domenico revealed the true reason for this meeting. He swore to her that Riccardo was a completely different man now, promising it was not a trap. How could he be so sure? Because his Isa Mafia heir, the ruthless man who never showed a single crack of emotion, had sat beside his dying father for 3 solid hours, confessing his deepest failures. Domenico was entirely shaken, witnessing his hardened son display a raw vulnerability for the very first time, all because he desperately wanted to be worthy of Alessia. The old Don gasped for air, revealing how Riccardo had finally smashed down the iron walls between them. He had let his father see the deeply flawed man hiding underneath the Mafia armor. Alessia felt her throat completely close up. Then, Domenico dropped the ultimate truth bomb. He told her Riccardo genuinely loves her, not that twisted, possessive mobster love he was raised on, but the real deal, the kind of love that makes a corrupted man desperately want to wash his hands clean. His shaking hand reached out, begging her to give his son one last shot for their daughter. Alessia whispered that it was not that simple. But Domenico warned her that true love is incredibly rare. The kind that survives a brutal betrayal and transforms into unshakable devotion is a true miracle. It forces us to see that often our absolute darkest misdeeds forge the most unbreakable bonds. Do not let my garbage parenting choices rob you of a lifetime of happiness, the Don whispered, collapsing into his pillows. Alessia stood in the quiet room, letting that heavy confession sink in. She thanked him for finally seeing her. He closed his eyes, asking her to send Riccardo in for a final goodbye. Stepping into the sterile hallway, she found Riccardo frozen. He asked what had happened, his face tight with stress. She looked at him and said his dad was sorry for a lot of things. And then something incredible happened. Alessia reached out and rested her hand on his arm. It was the first time she had willingly touched him in over a year, and she felt this terrifying underworld boss trembling beneath her fingers. She softly told him to go be with his father. It proves how one small, quiet moment of grace can instantly shift the entire energy of a broken relationship. She told him she was going to wait right there. Riccardo whispered that she did not have to stay, but she shut that down and told him to go. Alessia sank into his empty chair, her brain racing. Knowing Riccardo was programmed to be a toxic partner by a ruthless father did not give him a free pass. Nothing excused the pain he caused. But it finally helped her understand how a man could be fiercely in love with her, yet still stab her in the back. Life quietly proves that we are all molded by our deepest traumas. But the real test is whether we choose to break that mold. Sitting there, she wondered if this new version of Riccardo was the real deal, or just a temporary glitch caused by grief. She did not have the answer yet, but for the first time since their world blew up, she actually wanted to stick around and find out. 4 days later, the old Don took his last breath. The funeral was an absolute mob spectacle. Hundreds of guests in sharp suits blended the corporate world with the shady underground. The cathedral was stuffed with dramatic flowers and performative crying. It is just a theatrical illusion these crime families put on when a boss drops. Alessia showed up, telling herself she was only there so their daughter had representation. But let us be real. You and I know the human heart is messier than that. She went for Riccardo. Grief is a heavy beast to carry solo, and she remembered how fiercely he protected her before his lies ruined them. Deep down, despite the brutal betrayal, a piece of her still cared if he survived this emotional wreckage. Extending empathy, even to the people who broke us, is the ultimate proof of a beautiful soul. Listen, because you and I are about to walk through a story that hits right at the soul. Alessia stood in the back of the church, holding little Juliana. She watched Ricardo step to the microphone. His eulogy was rough. He laid bare the twisted history with his father, the man who ordered hits, yet the exact same man who tucked him in at night, right mid-sentence. His dark eyes found hers. The shift was instant. It was not a smile, but the lethal tension of his underworld life simply melted off his bones. She was the only anchor keeping him sane. Later, she slipped away, finding the untouchable air hiding in the shadows of the estate gardens. Here is the truth about grief. It strips away all our heavy armor, leaving us as nothing more than frightened souls. He sat frozen on a cold stone bench, just staring at the faded ink on his hands. Alessia sat down right next to him. No words. They let the suffocating silence stretch until he finally scraped out a quiet thank you. He knew full well she owed his broken family absolutely nothing. She did not hesitate, reminding him that he was still the father of her daughter. He had thrown her a lifeline once, and she was simply paying off the debt. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, asking if her presence was just a mandatory chore. Honesty here felt like walking on a razor blade. She admitted she had been turning his father's final words over in her head, weighing everything. She was just deeply tired. You see, keeping your guard up constantly in a fractured relationship will drain your spirit faster than any physical labor ever could. She let it all spill out into the open night air. She was exhausted from carrying the weight of her anger, tired of waiting for his next failure to justify her iron walls. He nodded, admitting that sounded like a living hell. She confessed that letting her guard down felt like walking off a cliff. If he broke her heart one more time, there would be nothing left to salvage. He locked his eyes on hers with a desperate, burning intensity. He swore on his own life to fight for her, day in and day out. He knew his word meant nothing right now. Yet here was a feared underworld boss, stripping away every ounce of his pride, begging to rebuild their shattered trust. True strength is never about power or control. It is having the courage to surrender your ego entirely for the one you love. He begged for just one chance to prove himself. Alessia laid down an unbreakable ultimatum. If she tried to open her heart and failed, then at least they would have their final closure. She killed the dangerous fantasy, pulling him out of his sea of guilt. This was a massive turning point. He handed her the keys to walk away, completely free of his usual manipulation. She agreed, but the boundaries were set in stone. They would crawl forward at a painfully slow pace, staying strictly as friends. The absolute deal-breaker? One single lie, and he was a ghost to her. No appeals, no second chances. She watched his eyes, using every survival instinct she had honed in his dark world, searching for a single twitch of hesitation. Setting rigid boundaries is the only way to protect your peace. It is the uncomfortable truth that saves you from drowning. She found not a trace of deception in his face. All she saw was a raw, terrifying sincerity. She let out a long breath and gave him the word he was starving for. Okay, they would try, but this effort was not about romantic fireworks. It meant sitting at a kitchen table on a Tuesday night, breaking bread as a family. It meant handling their little girl's future face to face, rather than hiding behind lawyers. They were meticulously gluing back together the foundation of a friendship that their toxic romance had burned to ash. Ricardo displayed a quiet patience you never see in a man of his standing. When her old scars flared up, he did not run. He just sat there, taking the verbal hits without a single excuse. Sometimes the most powerful way to love someone is simply holding the space for their anger until the storm finally passes out of their system. When she retreated, he gave her space. When she reached out, he was right beside her. She interrogated him about his darkest secrets. She asked about his old side pieces before Valentina came into the picture. He looked her dead in the eye and admitted there were many. He explained how his father conditioned him, teaching him to keep his violent street life completely walled off from his home. He owned every piece of the wreckage he caused. When she asked if the others were still around, he swore that, the moment she left, he buried that old life entirely. She was far from naive, so she quietly worked her own street connections to verify his story. Trusting sweet words is easy, but verifying actions is what keeps you alive. It is a harsh truth we must all learn. Against the odds, every single claim he made turned out to be completely real. It happened in such tiny fractions that she hardly noticed the heavy iron falling from her shoulders. Fast forward to their daughter's second birthday, and the atmosphere had completely shifted. The room was full of the safe, new life Alessia had built. Ricardo was not some unwanted ghost in the corner. He was right in the chaos, catching toddlers and pouring juice, moving in perfect rhythm with her. They navigated the noise with the chemistry of two survivors who had found the same beat. Her mother watched them, whispering about how right they looked, standing side by side. Alessia offered a guarded smile, admitting they were improving. But she grounded herself fast. She still did not trust him. We all learn the hard way that trust is a fragile glass house, years to build, a single second to shatter, and a painfully long lifetime to carefully rebuild. The heavy clouds were finally breaking, and you could see the light returning to Alessia's face. Her mother pulled her close, noticing how she radiated peace now that the shadows of her past were fading. But mothers always sense danger, reminding her to keep that shield raised. Hours later, the balloons were deflated, and little Juliana was fast asleep. Ricardo lingered by the front door, the silence stretching between them. He tested the invisible line, murmuring that he should head out, offering her an easy escape. Up until this second, they had played their roles flawlessly. Alessia felt the sudden, terrifying drumbeat of her own heart. She took a breath, stepped over the edge, and asked him to stay for just one drink. The beautiful thing about the human heart is its resilience. True healing begins the moment you find the courage to let the right energy back into your space. Picture this quiet room, because you and I are going to sit with this moment together. Alessia poured the dark wine, the glass trembling slightly against the bottle. They sat together on the very same couch where she had once cried until her lungs burned. Now, the ghosts were gone. They talked in soft voices about their little girl, about the mundane workday, carefully mapping out a future without making sudden moves. And then his rough fingers brushed against hers. The wild part, she let him stay. The connection was a lightning strike, heavy with the weight of their tragic history. He whispered that he missed this. Just breathing the same air, without demanding a thing, she swallowed her pride and confessed she missed it too. She squeezed his fingers, quietly warning him not to push the boundary. Sometimes, simply admitting you miss someone is the bravest thing you can do. Let us just have this one moment, she murmured. Just this. They sat rooted in the dim light, their fingers tangled together, watching the city breathe outside the glass. This was not a magical absolution. It was not a signed treaty of forgiveness. But it was genuine, and right then, genuine was enough to keep them anchored. 3 long months drifted by, and the impossible happened. She let him lean in. It unfolded so effortlessly, like gravity taking control. They were laughing about some silly thing their daughter had said. Then the laughter faded. His eyes darkened, fixing on her with that heavy, familiar pull. She leaned into the silence. The kiss was incredibly soft, cautious, asking permission with every second. It was entirely stripped of the destructive, burning passion that had once consumed their marriage. True peace is always so much quieter than the chaos of our past. That soft brush of lips was brutally grounded in reality. It was a conversation between 2 battered souls who had survived absolute devastation, yet decided to stand at the edge again. When he finally pulled back, he let his forehead drop against hers. He whispered that he had been starving for that exact moment for 2 brutal years. She felt the truth in it. Was it a mistake? It felt warmer than she wanted to admit. But she kept that truth locked behind her teeth, refusing to hand him the keys to her heart so easily. He read the air perfectly. Stepping back, he promised to leave before his luck ran dry. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead and faded into the night. Alessia stood alone, fingers tracing her lips, caught between terror and hope. We learned quickly that fear and bravery wear the exact same mask when you are standing alone in the dark. The preceding months became an exhausting dance of pushing forward and pulling back. They were 2 burn victims learning how to sit near the fire again. They stepped out into the world on real dates, the kind with the nervous energy of hiring a sitter and dressing up. Across those tables, they dissected their ruined marriage. They dragged the toxic history into the light, mapping out the landmines they used to step on. They fought, of course. Voices were raised, and apologies were forced out the next morning. But the miracle? They never walked away. They showed up for the brutal work that sends most people running. Slowly, a new foundation hardened. It lacked the sweet, naive shine of their youth. This new trust was scarred, heavy, and practically bulletproof. Showing up after the bitter argument is always the true, unglamorous test of a lasting bond. Stick with me, because the turning point always hides in ordinary moments. It was a random Tuesday. Little Juliana was miles away, spending her first overnight at her grandmother's since the ugly divorce. The silence in the apartment was heavy. Ricardo came by, and instead of ordering in, they cooked side by side. It was a cautious rhythm they had developed during this fragile truce. The kitchen filled with rising steam, the smell of garlic, and the soft laughter of 2 people remembering how to simply exist together. Later, the wine glasses were full. The chatter drifted from daily routines to the buried treasure of their past, the good memories they had locked away just to survive the pain. Then the air shifted. He looked at her and quietly asked if she remembered their 2nd anniversary. A single honest question has the power to alter the course of your entire life. You and I know that fragile space where an old memory hangs in the air. He brought up their trip to Positano. I remember you getting seasick on the ferry, he teased. I was not seasick, she shot back. I was just contemplatively quiet. He laughed, reminding her she turned a dignified shade of green. She cracked up, and it was a real, unguarded laugh. He watched her with total wonder. I had forgotten the sound of your real laugh, he told her, the one that proves you dropped your guard around me. She stopped instantly, painfully aware of her own vulnerability. But instead of running, she stood her ground. I am scared, she admitted. I really want this to work. The hardest lesson in love is that true bravery is just staying right there when you are absolutely terrified. I want to believe you have changed, she told him. But every time I relax, part of me is waiting for the trap to spring.
He nodded, accepting that her pain was completely reasonable. But it is exhausting.
She fired back. He agreed again. How do we move forward when I am constantly waiting for you to wreck me? He looked at her with heavy seriousness. Maybe we do not try to eliminate the fear, he said. Maybe we let it exist alongside everything else we are building. You might wait for me to hurt you for years. I cannot magically fix that in one night. I can only keep not hurting you, day after day, until the solid evidence outweighs your deep fear. It was a massive reality check for them both. The simple truth of life is that trust is never rebuilt with a single grand gesture. It is a quiet choice made every single morning. That is a crazy amount of pressure on you, she warned. He did not flinch. I caused the massive damage, so repairing it is my problem. What if you get tired? What if the work is not worth the hassle? He looked her dead in the eyes. You are absolutely worth it. Juliana is worth it, and I will never back down. She searched his face for a lie, finding nothing except raw honesty. I want to believe you, she whispered. Then just believe me, he said, reaching for her hand. Do not do it blindly. Just believe me enough to keep trying. She stared at their linked hands. His skin was covered in the hardcore tattoos that used to thrill her, then disgusted her, and now just belonged to him. A vital lesson for us all. We must learn to accept the permanent marks of the people we decide to forgive. Okay, she breathed out and leaned right in to kiss him. You have to understand, this kiss was totally different. It was not soft or questioning. A massive barrier finally shattered, and what poured out was pure hunger, the desperation they had buried under years of betrayal. His hands grabbed her waist, her fingers tangled in his hair, and they kissed like two broken people who had been starving for years. When they broke apart, gasping for air, he pressed his forehead against hers. Tell me to stop, he murmured. Tell me to leave, and I am gone. Stay. The words slipped out before her brain could stop it. His eyes locked onto hers. Are you totally sure? Was she sure? Absolutely not. But life teaches us a simple truth. Perfect certainty is just a rare luxury when our hearts are on the line. She knew she might never be totally sure about anything involving this man ever again. But here is a simple lesson. You do not need perfect certainty to have real courage. I am sure I want this, she told him. I am sure I want you. We will figure out the drama later. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she shut her racing brain off and just let herself feel. Fast forward to the next morning. She woke up with the sun blasting through the curtains and his heavy arm draped over her waist. For one crazy second, she forgot all the toxic betrayal and the bitter divorce. She was just a woman waking up next to her man. Then reality hit. She braced herself for a wave of panic and regret, but it never came. Instead, she just felt this incredible, quiet sense of peace wash over her soul. The peace she felt was fragile, but real. It felt like a heavy door had swung open to a new chapter, not erasing the past, but starting fresh. You are thinking way too loudly, Ricardo mumbled, keeping his eyes shut. I am just processing, she replied. Good processing or bad? Good, I think. He opened his eyes and faced her. In that soft morning glow, the ruthless man looked younger and completely unguarded. He was wearing his damaged heart on his sleeve, showing the vulnerability she had searched for. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Ask me in a few hours, she joked. He groaned that it was not reassuring. But it is honest, she said, touching his rough jawline. A simple truth of life. An honest uncertainty is always a stronger foundation than a comfortable lie. I have no idea what this means yet, she whispered. I do not know what we are right now, but I know I did not make a mistake last night. He kissed her palm. That is more than enough. Stick with me here, because the following months threw agonizing new tests at them. They lived apart, building this fragile connection, slowly introducing their kid to the idea of them being together again. They dodged the judgment of friends who thought they were crazy. Ricardo played it smart, moving slow and letting her set the pace. They did not hide their romance, but they never announced it. They let everyone lose their minds, trying to decipher those lingering glances. Life teaches us a beautiful lesson. The strongest bonds are built in quiet privacy, far away from the noise of the world. Soon enough, they were back to finishing each other's sentences. This is dangerously toxic, her best friend warned. You are setting yourself up to be wrecked again. Maybe, Alicia shot back, her tone steady. Or maybe I am giving myself a real shot at the life I want. He is a different guy now. Is he different enough? That was the heavy question, and she only had hope to lean on. When the big proposal dropped, it was nothing like their flashy first engagement. No five-star restaurant, no massive diamond ring to flex his dark wealth. It was just the three of them chilling in her quiet living room on a lazy Sunday afternoon, while their daughter played with wooden blocks on the rug. It proves a vital life lesson. True love never needs a grand stage to be profoundly real. Picture this scene in your mind. The big bad Don Ricardo is sitting on the floor playing with toy blocks like a normal dad. Alicia is reading a book, soaking in this quiet domestic peace. Out of nowhere, the boss looks up and drops a casual nuke. He tells her to marry him again. No heavy pressure, not because of their kid, but straight up because he wants her. He says they fought way too hard for this comeback to not finish it. She stares at him like he lost his mind. It is the worst proposal ever, but also raw as hell. This is the exact same ruthless dude who shattered her heart and spent 3 straight years grinding to glue it back together. A powerful reminder that true redemption is never about erasing the past, but doing the agonizing work to build a better future. Ricardo still wears his dangerous boss energy like a bulletproof vest, but he finally let her behind the armor. Alicia is not letting him off the hook easy though. She tells him to ask properly. Suddenly, a genuine smile breaks out on his face. Not the mobster smirk, but a real one she thought was gone forever. He leaves the baby, walks over, and drops to one knee. The ruthless Don is literally on his knees. He tells her he does not deserve her, but he spent 36 months trying to become a man who does. He wants to spend his life proving it. He pulls out a worn box, admitting he was terrified to ask, carrying this ring for 3 straight months, waiting for the right moment. A profound lesson. True love strips away our dangerous ego until we are brave enough to surrender. You and I might expect a blinding diamond from a boss, right? Nope. He opens the box to reveal a simple white gold band. It is the opposite of the heavy rock he bought her the first time, reflecting how grounded they are now. She says yes, and his relief is insane. Fast forward to the wedding. They keep it low-key. Just family in a quiet garden in Milan. Their little girl is the flower girl, speed walking down the aisle throwing petals. Alicia is rocking a white dress again. Not to fake being a naive bride, but because this is a total reset. They are not rebooting the old marriage, they are dropping a brand new season. It shows us a beautiful truth. Second chances are never about repeating the broken past. They are about writing a completely new story. Ricardo waits at the altar, looking incredibly sharp in a dark suit. You can see the mob tattoos on his neck and knuckles, flashing his ruthless history. But the man wearing the ink is completely different now. Alicia walks up and whispers that he looks terrified, and the powerful boss admits it. He is shaking in his shoes, terrified he will ruin everything again, terrified this redemption arc is just a dream. She looks him dead in the eyes and tells him to prove it is real. So he does. They get married again, dropping heavy vows they wrote themselves. No generic script, just pure honesty. They put their messy history on the table and swear to do better. A final lesson for the night. The deepest love is found when we stop hiding our scars and finally choose to heal together. You and I have seen enough broken promises to know when a vow is just empty air, but listen to her standing there. She looks this former terror of the underworld dead in the eyes and offers her trust. Not a cheap, easy trust. It is the heavy kind, bought with real sweat and hard proof. He answers right back, his voice thick, swearing to wake up every single morning and choose to be a man worthy of her. When it is finally official, Ricardo pulls her in for a kiss that drowns out their crying kid and the cheering crowd. In that blinding second, Alicia feels complete, unshakable peace. It is not the naive fairy tale from their first time at the altar. It is gritty and real. Sometimes, you only find out how strong a foundation really is after you watch the house burn down around you. This new bond is bulletproof because they crawled through broken glass to earn it. The reception is pure, beautiful chaos. Loud music shaking the floorboards, good food, and genuine laughter. Their first wedding was a cold, stiff display of power just to impress the city bosses. Tonight, they are tearing up the dance floor, holding each other close. Ricardo leans in and whispers against her ear, asking if she's really happy. She gives him a fast, solid yes. No hesitation, no catch. He pulls back, searching her face, and her eyes catch the dark family tattoo resting on his neck. Years ago, that ink was a bitter, toxic joke, but looking at a man who shattered his own dark world to save his home, that ink finally tells the absolute truth. People can change, but they have to want to bleed for it. The way he looks at her, you can tell she is his entire universe. He swears to spend his remaining days earning this second chance. She answers him straight. If the sky falls again, they will carry the weight together. This is no longer the toxic denial of their youth. It is gritty, realistic hope. They survived the ugliest betrayal, tore up a bitter divorce, and climbed out of rock bottom with bare hands. Whatever comes next, they will face it as a wall. 2 years melt away, and their son Marco arrives on a cold, rainy morning in November. He is screaming his lungs out, perfectly healthy, already carrying that heavy, stubborn energy he inherited from his father. It is a beautiful thing to witness. Real victory is not about having a perfect record. It is about rebuilding something beautiful from the wreckage. Try to picture the most feared man in the underground completely falling apart. Ricardo stands there, cradling his newborn son, and he is weeping, openly weeping. The cold, untouchable boss from the old days would never a single soul see him crack. Meanwhile, their 4-year-old daughter stares at the baby like he dropped from space, complaining that he is way too loud. Alicia laughs gently, reminding her she used to do the exact same thing. The picture is complete. It looks nothing like the hollow fairy tale she dreamed of on her first wedding day. It is scarred. It is messy. They dragged themselves through fire to reach this living room, but it is real. The years slip by. Kids grow. Life throws its heavy punches, but the foundation holds. The truest strength a man can ever show is simply keeping a quiet promise. Ricardo did not just change at home. He took a wrecking ball to his empire. The family business is still a titan, but he's scrubbed it clean. It is fully legitimate now. He built something his children will never have to lie about. It took a long time, but Alacia finally let her heavy armor fall. She will never forget the fire he started in her soul. But the man he became does the work every single day. He earned his forgiveness with sweat, not words. 10 years pass since that second time at the altar. They leave the kids with their grandmother for a rare night out, driving straight back to the quiet garden where they fought for that second chance. Just breathing in the night air, standing in the spot where it all turned around. A good life is simply a long series of hard choices you commit to together. They drift down those familiar stone paths, smiling about the memory of their daughter running wild. Then the night air shifts. Ricardo stops, his voice dropping. He asks if she ever regrets letting him back in. He is terrified she still sees the monster who ruined them. Alacia does not lie. She looks at the man she loves and admits that when he comes home late or takes a hushed call, that old panic still grips her chest. The ghost of betrayal never fully leaves. Ricardo looks shattered, begging for forgiveness, but she gently stops him. She tells him not to carry that guilt anymore. Yes, he gave her the scars, but she has made her peace with them. Listen carefully. True healing is not about erasing the ugly marks of your past. It is about learning to live with the heavy echoes and still choosing to love anyway. She asks him the hardest question in 10 long years. Has that fear ever come true? No. Never. She says that truth alone quiets her darkest anxiety. Stopping in her tracks, she looks straight into his fractured soul and admits she has 0 regrets. Not even during those agonizing nights when she felt like a fool for taking him back. She points toward the garden, to the quiet life they pulled out of absolute ruin. This reality is worth bleeding for, she tells him. The feared boss drops his gaze, whispering that he will never deserve her. Alacia just smiles, pulling him into a slow, anchoring kiss that finally washes his doubt away. It leaves us with a vital truth. Real peace is found when you finally figure out what is actually worth the agonizing pain of rebuilding. He pulls back, resting his forehead against hers, and says he loves her. He makes it clear this is no longer the toxic, jealous obsession from their past. He loves the fierce warrior she became, the woman who survived his worst damage and still found courage to try. She replies, she loves him too, not because he is flawless, but because he wakes up every single day and fights his demons to be a better man. Listen to this part closely. Consistent, daily effort will always defeat fake perfection. They stand quietly in the fading light, 2 flawed souls who completely shattered each other, only to forge an iron bond. Forget the plastic fairy tales. A genuine love story never ends with a clean fade to black. It just keeps breathing, a beautiful and honest work in progress. His past betrayal brought their world crashing down, yet it was real love, the grueling kind that demands patience, that glued them back together. They carry deep scars, but they are entirely whole. Their kids will grow up knowing a family can weather the most destructive storms. Their son will learn that being a real man means owning your epic failures and doing the brutal work to fix them. Ricardo, the feared boss, and Alacia, the woman brave enough to leave, will wake up and choose each other every morning. That brings us to our final truth for the night. Authentic love is never about dodging mistakes or pretending you are flawless. It is about having the ultimate courage to clean up the massive mess you made and the sheer grace to let someone heal you in return.